What's up guys, it's Isaac here. I've got 5 of my favorite wintertime baits laid out here in front of me. I'm going to go through each one, talk a little bit about when I use it and how I fish it. So I'm going to start off right here with a jig. This is a 1/2 ounce flip-in jig. This isn't the particular kind of jig that I would recommend to someone for winter fishing, but it was just the jig that I had with me when I decided to shoot the video. So this is more so representing the general category of jig fishing. Jigs obviously have a big reputation for catching large fish year-round, but a lot of people don't use them except for in the winter because their options are limited to a smaller handful of baits, and the jig is one that consistently produces for a lot of people in the winter time. So ideally, the jig that I would go with a smaller presentation with a football head, and ideally you should use a hook that's a little bit skinnier, so that you can downsize your line and still be able to drive that hook through the fish's mouth. That was an idea that I saw kind of presented by Tactical Bass, and they recommended getting a light wire hook so that you can downsize your line and have an even more finesse-like presentation while also driving that hook through the fish's mouth. So that's a great bait. I'm not saying a flipping jig won't work, but ideally definitely go with that finesse presentation so that you can really target those fish on the bottom by just dragging it across right in front of their noses. So yeah, all right, hop into the next one. I'm gonna go to the jerkbait next. If you know anything about winter bass fishing, you'll know that the jerkbait is a very popular one that people go to. This particular one is a Smithwick jerkbait. I believe it's from the Rogue 8 series, but I'm actually not sure about the model name. I know that this one dives to about 8 feet. And it suspends perfectly in the water column, which is nice because then you can completely determine the action basically and keep it in the strike zone for a long amount of time. So, you know, a lot of you guys know that when the water's warmer, the fish have a faster and higher metabolism going. So at that point, you want to rip that bait through the water pretty quickly, and you can trigger a lot of reaction strikes that way. And then as the water gets colder, and specifically in the winter when it's really cold, you're going to want to pause that bait for a long time, up to 10, 15, 20 seconds even in between those jerks, so that that really sits in front of those lethargic fish's face so that they have a ton of time to think about it and eventually trigger those fish into biting. So that's a great option. Also, side note, this is the exact bait that I caught my personal best on. It was like a 9-pound bass back in February, so I have a video of the release of that fish on my channel. I'm going to try and put that link in the video description if I can, so you guys can go check it out if you want. Alright, up next, this is a Rapala Shad Rap. This is the size 5 in the shad color. This is the bait that I go to when I really can't buy a bite. The package of this thing says it dives, I think, 5 to 9 feet. I fish it with 12-pound fluorocarbon, which is a little bit heavy. I just don't have any smaller diameter line on me at this point. So I usually fish it with 12-pound fluorocarbon, and it dives to around 5 feet. So you could get it a lot deeper if you wanted to go with something like 6-pound fluoro. But the beauty of this thing is it's very versatile. You can fish it like a jerkbait, or you can fish it like a crankbait. I will say that it doesn't stay perfectly in the water column when you do pause it. It does tend to rise a little bit, but it suspends fairly well. So that's an absolutely awesome option. It's very tiny, triggers a lot of those bass that might not be hungry enough to eat something a little bigger. But yeah, definitely check this bait out if you get the chance. Next up is an underspin. I don't know if you guys follow Bama Bass's channel, but this is his favorite winter bait, or at least it was seemingly his favorite bait last winter. And there's really 2 techniques that you can fish this bait with. One, cast it out into open, deep water, let it sink to the bottom, or let it sink a number of seconds until you think it's in a school of fish, and then slowly creep that thing along. Just fast enough to get that tail wagging back and forth and that blade spinning. That's a really good subtle presentation to trigger those bass into biting. They're not going to want to chase around something that's moving like crazy, so make sure to fish it slow. This particular one I think is a 3/16 ounce Fishead Underspin with a 3.8-inch keitech swing impact. So awesome bait. And the other technique that I want to talk about with it is you can fish it. A lot of times, I had a lot of good luck last winter fishing it along those shallow grass lines, kind of on the edge of it. Another great option for that technique is a swim jig. It's a little less subtle, so it's not ideal in that way, but it gets through the weeds a little better. So definitely try the other technique if your first one that you try isn't working too well. And last but not least, this is my absolute favorite wintertime bait. This is a River2Sea S-Waver 168 in the bluegill color. It is a phenomenal bait for targeting those suspended fish that are a little bit shallower than those fish that hunker to the bottom on those really cold days. When the water temperatures, I'd say 40 or higher though, this is an absolutely awesome bait. The biggest thing I can tell you tips-wise for how to fish this is just make sure you're going slow enough. The first day that I caught some fish on this, half of the lake was actually frozen, and I kind of had a little flashback to Tactical Basson's underwater footage video of this bait, and I realized that some of the bites were coming on it when it was almost dead still or moving very slowly. So I tried to chuck that thing out as far as I could on my swim bait rod, reel it back super slowly, giving it a couple twitches, and more often than not the bites came just reeling it super slowly. Make sure you reel it fast enough to get that back and forth S motion out of it that you kind of associate with glide baits, but all in all this is an awesome winter bait. It sits at about, I mean, you can fish it anywhere from like 1 foot deep to 5 feet deep if you want, completely depending on your line size. I fish it with 17-pound fluorocarbon. When I do that, it usually swims around somewhere between 3 and 4 feet, I would say. And yeah, that has worked super well for me. I caught a 5.5 on December 19th, I think it was. So that was an awesome fish. Just a really good way to trigger those big bites in the wintertime. So yeah guys, I hope these kind of helped you out a little bit. Just try and categorize them in your mind. You know, the jig and the underspin are kind of your bottom baits, and then this is something that you might pull out when you just can't get a bite, and these two are really good for targeting suspended fish. This jerkbait for a little bit deeper suspended fish, and this one for those more shallow but still suspended fish. So those are my 5 favorite wintertime baits. Hope you guys enjoyed and got